Well, thanks Uptake for being here at Netroots and interviewing grassroots organizations like Fair Vote Minnesota. We're an organization that's nonprofit, nonpartisan, that's working for voting reform. And the reason why it's so important is because we have an election system that doesn't work for us anymore. It's very broken. We, at the state level in our plurality elections, elect candidates without the support of a majority of voters, and we often find ourselves in the bad circumstance of needing to be strategic in how we vote. We often vote for the candidate we don't want because we're worried about throwing our vote away or helping elect the candidate we like the least. So we get rid of all of those problems. And meanwhile, we have an electoral process that can run candidates who are really rather extreme, and they can win with a plurality of votes. And that's wrong for democracy. So this makes sure that whoever wins with a broad base of a majority of the voters, and that's so critical. And at the local level, it's very important and works very well because we can combine the local primary and the general election and make sure that all the voters can participate when most of the candidates are on the ballot, and the candidate is elected in the high turnout election in November when participation is greatest and most diverse. And that just means we bring more voters to the process, we empower more voters in the process, and it increases and boosts opportunities for non-traditional candidates and represents more voters.
In what ways is Fair Vote Minnesota and Minnesota in general leading this charge and this push?
Fair Vote is the organization that is spearheading the initiatives locally. We work with communities that have charters to change charters, to amend the charters to allow for this difference in the way we hold elections. So we now have it in Minneapolis. We're bringing it to St. Paul, and Sarah here is the coordinator for the education efforts in St. Paul. There are several other communities in Minnesota now interested in using this. Bloomington, Duluth, Red Wing, and other communities have expressed interest as well. And we want to demonstrate that it can work very well at the local level, and then make sure that we can entertain the discussion of using it at a state level where we really have a big problem in the way we hold our elections.
Sarah, tell us about St. Paul and what you're up to.
Yeah, it's really exciting work. I get to get out in different St. Paul communities, let people know that ranked voting is coming to them in this election cycle. So we're working in a lot of different areas with direct voter contact. We'll be at community events spreading the word. We're forming organizational coalitions to work to build a stronger community that supports electoral reform that's going to last for long after this election cycle. So we're really focusing on proven grassroots strategies to make sure that St. Paul voters are well educated this November.
A question for either of you, I guess. I mean, how do people you talk to, how do voters respond to this innovative new idea? What questions do you most often get asked, and what are the misconceptions out there?
Sure, that's a good question. Well, the most frequent question is, won't it confuse voters? Well, we know that through surveys and through implementations across the country, this is now used in several cities, especially in the Bay Area and on the East Coast as well, and now in Minnesota, the voters find it very easy to adapt to the new system. It really means instructing voters how to rank on a ballot, first choice, second choice, and third choice. And by doing that, they can make sure their vote continues to count until one candidate is elected with a majority of support, or until all the seats are filled in an at-large race. And it's really very simple, but it's the question we get the most, and the biggest misconception is that it might confuse voters. But that's easily refuted, and we know that we can easily implement this here in Minneapolis and now in St. Paul. And some other misconceptions are that it will simply confuse the electoral process, and candidates might find it hard to run under the new system. And again, candidates have found that it's better to run under the new system because they get to go out and not just ask for first choice votes, but they get to ask voters for their second choice votes. If a voter doesn't want to vote for them in the first place, then they can ask for their second place vote and really build a majority coalition in order to win. And that's very empowering both for the candidates and for the voters.
Do you want to add anything to that, Sarah?
Nope, I think Jean did a great job. We are just excited to be in St. Paul. Look forward to working with different communities and different organizations to make sure that this St. Paul educational effort is even a greater success than Minneapolis was, and we're excited about implementing this new process.
There is one additional issue that I think is important to highlight for the audience, and that is it's often seen as does it benefit the Republicans, or does it benefit the Democrats, or does it benefit third parties? It really benefits voters. Bottom line, this is a system that empowers voters, brings voters out to the process, engages them in a very different way, in a more empowering way in the election process. And it doesn't advantage or disadvantage one party or the other. Whoever prevails with a majority of support wins at the end of the day, and the parties need to run candidates that can appeal to a majority of the voters.
I wanted to ask one final question. I mean, a couple of Fair Vote Minnesota events I've been to, you've got strong support from some pretty well-respected moderate politicians in Minnesota. Tom Horner, the independent candidate for governor in the previous election, Dave Durenberger, former governor, Arnie Carlson, and then Bill Moyers came out for an event recently. In the kind of established Republican and Democratic camps, I mean, what do they think about Fair Vote Minnesota and this push?
We have support broadly from former elected leaders and current elected leaders, including our current governor, Mark Dayton. We have the support of the Democratic Party officially and the Independence Party and the Green Party. There's not official support yet from the Republican Party, but many leaders within the party support this initiative. And so it is really broadly supported. And we want to make sure that it continues to grow in a very cross-partisan way to appeal to the broad base of voters. We know most voters don't affiliate necessarily with the party. The vast majority do not. So they would just want to make sure that we have a system in place where they feel like they can cast their vote for the candidate that they think is best, and we want to make sure that that choice is available to voters without the consequences of a spoiled election or or having a system in place where voters feel like they'll be throwing their vote away.
Well, thank you so much for appearing on the Uptake. Oh, and one question, if I may. I know we're running out of time, but what brings you to Netroots, and what message are you sharing here?
Well, Netroots is a great place for young people to get engaged in all issues that are related to moving the country forward. And political reform like this, and election reform like ranked choice voting, really is a foundation for many other reforms that need to happen. It's very difficult to advance other reforms without having political reform in place first. And we want to share that message. We want to make sure that people understand why this is so important for all the other issues that they work on. And it's not just Netroots. We're out at all different kinds of conventions and places across the political spectrum. This particular convention tends to be more liberal, but we're at all different kinds of conventions, making sure that people who work on issues know that political reform comes first and foremost, along with other reforms.